They call themselves the guardians of civil liberties. Their corporate motto explicitly claims they are saving the West from its enemies. Yet, they built the single most intrusive surveillance engine in human history. This is a company founded by a libertarian philosopher that survives on the payroll of the CIA. It is a firm that claims to empower human decision-making, yet its algorithms determine who gets deported, who gets audited, and in some cases, who gets targeted by a drone strike. It is Palantir Technologies. And the paradox is this. Most tech giants want to sell you ads. Palantir wants to sell you to the government. They are the only company in Silicon Valley that openly despises Silicon Valley. Yet they used the very same venture capital model to privatize the American intelligence apparatus. On paper, they are just a software vendor. In reality, they are the operating system of the modern security state. But to understand how a startup conquered the Pentagon, we have to look past the stock price. We have to look at the plumbing. The year is 2003. The dot-com bubble has burst, and the smoke is still rising from the rubble of the World Trade Center. The US intelligence community is in a panic. They have the data. They have terabytes of phone records, flight manifests, and bank transfers. But they cannot connect the dots. The NSA creates files, the FBI creates files, and the CIA creates files. But none of these systems speak to each other. Enter Peter Thiel. Fresh off the sale of PayPal, he is sitting on a fortune and a radical idea. At PayPal, they built a fraud detection system to catch Russian mobsters stealing money. It was designed to spot patterns in noise. Thiel looks at the war on terror and asks a simple, arrogant question. If we can use this code to save a transaction, why can't we use it to save a country? He teams up with Alex Karp, a neo-Marxist philosopher with zero technical experience, to build Palantir. It sounds like a joke. A libertarian and a socialist walking into the Pentagon. But the government wasn't laughing. They were desperate. This is where the story usually gets simplified. But we need to look at the financial vehicle that made this possible. It's called In-Q-Tel. This is the CIA's venture capital arm. Yes, the spies have a VC firm. In the mid-2000s, In-Q-Tel injects roughly $2 million into Palantir. The amount of money is negligible. $2 million is a rounding error in defence spending. But the signalling value is infinite. By taking In-Q-Tel money, Palantir didn't just get cash, they got security clearance. They got the bat phone to the analysts. For 2 years, CIA operatives sat inside Palantir's offices, co-developing the software. This wasn't a private company building a product for the free market. This was a private company building a bespoke weapon for a specific client, subsidised by the taxpayer, but retaining the intellectual property rights for themselves. It was the ultimate arbitrage. Public funding, private profit, and total secrecy. Alex Karp is not your typical CEO. He doesn't wear hoodies, he wears brightly coloured athletic gear and holds a PhD in social theory. He frames Palantir's mission not in terms of profit, but in terms of Western survival. He argues that Silicon Valley has betrayed America, that companies like Google and Apple are too squeamish to do the dirty work required to keep the lights on. Karp positioned Palantir as the ethical alternative. He argued that by building better tools, you could actually reduce mass surveillance. The logic went like this. If the analyst can find the terrorist quickly, they don't need to dragnet the entire population. It was a seductive pitch. It allowed the government to buy a surveillance tool while telling themselves they were buying a privacy tool. But there was a flaw in the philosophy. When you build a tool that sees everything, the definition of a threat starts to expand. By 2008, Palantir had the backing of the CIA and the brainpower of Silicon Valley. They had a product called Gotham. It was sleek, it was fast, and it looked like something out of a Tom Cruise movie. But they had a problem. Outside of the intelligence agencies, nobody wanted to buy it. Corporations didn't understand it. Investors thought the valuation was insane. They were burning cash, and the war on terror market was finite. To survive, Palantir needed to prove that their software wasn't just for spies. They needed to prove it could work in the chaotic, messy reality of a ground war. So, they packed their servers and went to Iraq. And that is where the software stopped being a theory and started choosing targets. Imagine you are an intelligence officer in Baghdad. It is 110 degrees. You have a stack of reports on your desk. One is a report about a stolen Nokia cell phone. Another is a receipt from a fertilizer shop. A third is a license plate captured by a drone. In the old world, these 3 pieces of paper live in 3 different filing cabinets. They never meet. And because they never meet, a convoy drives over an IED the next morning. Palantir changed the physics of this information. They deployed Gotham to the forward operating bases. Soldiers started feeding in everything, every scrap of data. Suddenly, the software draws a line. The guy who stole the Nokia is the cousin of the guy who bought the fertilizer, and his car was seen parked next to the blast site 2 days ago. The screen lights up red. The convoy is rerouted. Lives are saved. This was the golden age of Palantir's reputation. They were the good guys. They were the wizards who used code to protect soldiers. But how does it actually work? This is critical. Don't think of Palantir as a database. Think of it as a translator. Most government data is unstructured or siloed. The FBI uses Oracle. The CIA uses something else. The local police use Excel spreadsheets from 1998. These systems speak different languages. Palantir's engineers perform what they call forward deployment. They go in, they map the data, and they wrap it in a unifying layer called an ontology. This transforms a row in a spreadsheet into an object, a person, a place, a weapon. Once the data is an object, it can be linked. If the IRS database says John Doe lives at 123 Main Street, and a police report says a car registered to J. Doe was seen at a crime scene, Palantir's engine fuses them into one entity. It's not magic, it's plumbing. But it's plumbing that allows for a single pane of glass view of reality. The software doesn't just store data, it maps relationships. It turns a list of names into a spider web. Understanding this ontology concept is what separates the casual observer from the serious analyst. Most people look at Palantir and see a stock ticker. You need to see the infrastructure. We break down these hidden mechanics every week on Capital Curriculum. If you want to understand the systems that actually run the world, not the ones they tell you about on the news, make sure you're subscribed. We are building a dossier on the privatization of power, and you don't want to miss the next file. The military success in Iraq and Afghanistan gave Palantir a blank check. They became the darling of the Pentagon. But by 2011, the wars were winding down. The surge was over. The massive defence contracts were at risk of drying up. Palantir had built a Ferrari for driving in the desert, and now they needed a new track. They needed a client with an endless budget and an endless appetite for surveillance. They looked at the United States. Not the military, but the police. They realised that the same technology used to track insurgents in Fallujah could be used to track gang members in Los Angeles or tax cheats in New York. But there is a fundamental difference. In a war zone, there are no civil liberties. In an American city, there is a constitution. At least, there used to be. New Orleans, a city struggling with one of the highest murder rates in America. In 2012, the mayor strikes a secret deal. No city council vote, no public debate. He invites Palantir to deploy its predictive policing technology. For 6 years, the program runs in the shadows. The software ingests everything: arrest records, field interview cards, social media posts, who you know, who you text. It assigns a risk score to citizens. It creates a list of likely offenders. Note the phrasing: not people who have committed a crime, but people the algorithm thinks might commit a crime. Police officers are given these names. They conduct interventions. They knock on doors. They warn people. This is the plot of Minority Report, brought to life in the humid heat of Louisiana. And nobody knew it was happening until investigative journalists exposed it years later.
This is called social network analysis, or SNA. In a counter-terrorism context, if you call a bomb maker, you are likely a terrorist. It's a guilt by association model that works for hunting cells. But when you apply SNA to domestic policing, the math turns toxic. In poor communities, everyone knows someone with a record. It's unavoidable. The algorithm sees these connections and flags the innocent neighbour, the cousin, the kid who plays basketball at the wrong court. It creates a feedback loop. The police patrol the high-risk areas identified by the data. They make more arrests in those areas, which feeds more data into the system, which tells them to patrol that area even more. It amplifies racial bias under the guise of objective math. Palantir provided the tool, but they claimed the police set the policy. It's the classic gun manufacturer defense. We just make the weapon. We don't pull the trigger. But Palantir's engineers were there, sitting at the desks, tuning the model. The impact in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles was profound. In Chicago, they had the strategic subject list. People were visited by police and told they were on a heat list, based on an algorithm they couldn't see and couldn't appeal. Imagine the psychological toll. You haven't done anything, but the computer says you're dangerous. Critics argue this destroys the presumption of innocence. Palantir argued they were helping allocate limited police resources. But the secrecy is the tell. If this was truly a tool for public safety, why hide it? Why run it through philanthropic grants to bypass the city council budget approval process? That's what happened in New Orleans. It wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about bypassing democracy to install a surveillance infrastructure that the voters never asked for. The experiments in policing were controversial, but they were small potatoes compared to what was coming next. Local police departments have limited budgets. They pay in the millions. Palantir wanted the billions. They needed a federal agency with a massive mandate and a massive problem managing human data. In 2017, the political winds shifted. A new administration came into power with a singular focus: immigration. "Build the wall" was the slogan. But a physical wall is expensive and slow. The real wall needed to be digital. Palantir looked at ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and saw their perfect partner. This wasn't about fighting terrorists anymore, it was about hunting families. Enter Immigration OS. This is the system Palantir built for ICE. It goes by names like Falcon. Before Palantir, if an ICE agent wanted to deport someone, they had to query separate databases. They had to check the FBI criminal file, then check the visa application, then check the DMV. It was slow, it left gaps. Palantir fused it all. Now an agent types a name. Instantly, they see the visa overstay. But they also see the utility bill the person paid last week, revealing their current address. They see the license plate scan from a highway camera 2 hours ago. They see the school records of their children. The system provides near real-time visibility. It turned deportation from a bureaucratic process into a precision strike capability. Civil liberties groups were horrified. They called it a deportation machine. But for ICE, it was a miracle. The key here is the scope of the data. It's not just government files. Palantir systems can ingest commercial data. Think about the digital exhaust you leave behind. Your credit score, your toll road pass, your address history from online shopping. When the government contracts Palantir, they aren't just buying software, they are buying the ability to merge the public record with the private sector's surveillance economy. The Investigation Case Management (ICM) system allowed agents to search across hundreds of specific categories: tattoos, scars, country of origin. It allowed them to map networks of associates. If you are an undocumented immigrant and you are careful, but your cousin posts a photo of you on Facebook, and that cousin is linked to a phone number in the system, the graph connects. You are flagged. This is the network effect of surveillance. You are only as private as the least private person you know. This partnership with ICE became a flashpoint. In Silicon Valley, tech workers were revolting. Google employees protested Project Maven. Amazon employees protested facial recognition. Palantir employees were no different. They saw their code being used to separate families at the border. They saw the kids in cages on the news and knew their software helped put them there. Confrontations erupted at the headquarters, but Alex Karp stood firm. He doubled down. While Google backed out of defense contracts to appease their staff, Karp issued a manifesto. He said that companies don't get to decide who the government targets. He argued that if the US government is elected democratically, it is not the place of a software CEO to veto their policies. It was a convenient stance. It positioned Palantir as the only loyal tech company in the eyes of Washington. And loyalty pays. The IC contracts brought in hundreds of millions, $200 million to be precise. But it also made Palantir a pariah. They were protested. Their brand was toxic in consumer circles. But in 2020, the world broke. A virus swept the globe. Governments were blind. They didn't know where the hospital beds were. They didn't know where the ventilators were. They didn't know who was sick. The NHS in the UK, the CDC in the US, they were drowning in spreadsheets that didn't update. Palantir saw the ultimate opening. They didn't just want to be the spy agency's tool anymore, they wanted to run the healthcare system. They offered their software for a nominal fee, sometimes even for free initially. It was the classic drug dealer model. The first hit is free. But once your health data is in their ontology, good luck getting it out. London, 2020. The National Health Service is the crown jewel of the British state. It holds the medical records of nearly 70 million people, a goldmine of genetic and health data. During the pandemic panic, the UK government awarded Palantir an emergency contract to manage the COVID-19 data store. Almost overnight, the company that hunted terrorists was now tracking vaccines. They integrated patient data, supply chains, and hospital capacity. It worked. The logistics improved. But then the emergency ended, and Palantir didn't leave. They leveraged that foothold into a massive, controversial contract to run the federated data platform for the entire NHS. Critics called it a data grab. Privacy International warned that handing health data to a US spy tech firm was insane. But the government was hooked. They had become dependent on the dashboard. This brings us to the core of Palantir's business model: vendor lock-in. In the software world, we usually talk about SaaS, software as a service. Palantir is more like government as a service. Once an agency builds its workflows on Palantir's Foundry platform, switching costs become astronomical. You aren't just moving files, you have to rebuild the entire logic of how your organization thinks. The data models, the access controls, the training, it's all proprietary.
The Conversation reported that agencies are becoming structurally dependent on Palantir to function. They lose the institutional muscle memory to do things themselves. If Palantir were to turn off the servers tomorrow, the IRS couldn't track fraud, the Army couldn't target logistics, and ICE couldn't track migrants. This gives Palantir leverage that no private company should have. They aren't just a contractor, they are a critical infrastructure risk.
Then came Ukraine. If the war on terror was the beta test, the war in Ukraine was the live product launch for Palantir's AI warfare suite. Alex Karp was the first Western CEO to meet Zelensky. Palantir deployed its software to help the Ukrainian army target Russian tanks. It allowed them to process satellite imagery, drone feeds, and human intel in seconds, directing artillery fire with terrifying precision. It was a massive PR win. It validated the thesis: Western liberal democracies need hard power to survive. It scrubbed the stain of the ICE deportations. Suddenly, they were freedom fighters again. But it also normalized the idea that AI should be making kill chain decisions. The loop between seeing a target and destroying a target is shrinking to zero, and Palantir is the code closing that loop. So we have a company that runs the war machine, the immigration machine, and the health machine. They have contracts with the IRS, the CDC, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the police. They are everywhere. But recently, a new ambition has leaked out. Reports from the New York Times in 2025 suggest a plan for a centralized government data mega API. The idea is to merge social security records, immigration files, and domestic surveillance into one master view for the president. A dashboard for the commander-in-chief. It sounds efficient, but in the hands of an administration willing to weaponize the state against its political enemies, this isn't just a tool, it's a skeleton key to the entire American population. And Palantir is the one cutting the key. Imagine a cabinet meeting in the near future. The president asks a question. Who are the organizers of this protest? In 1970, the FBI would need weeks of wiretaps. Today, the Palantir dashboard answers in seconds. It pulls the tax records of the donors, the travel history of the leaders, and the social graph of the participants. It highlights the vulnerabilities. It suggests the leverage. This is the shadow government, not a cabal of men in a smoky room, but a user interface. The danger isn't that Palantir is evil. The danger is that Palantir is efficient. Efficiency in a democracy is a double-edged sword. Checks and balances are designed to be inefficient. They're designed to be slow. When you remove the friction, you remove the safeguards. Palantir has greased the wheels of state power to the point where they spin with zero resistance. The ultimate mechanism of control here is trade secrecy. Because Palantir is a private entity, its algorithms are protected intellectual property. You cannot FOIA the source code. A judge cannot easily audit the weighting of the risk scores. When a government agency acts on Palantir's data, they can say, "The computer told us to." It launders accountability. This is the privatization of the state's brain. We have outsourced the logic of governance to a firm that is accountable only to its shareholders, or, in Palantir's case, to a special class of voting shares controlled by the founders. Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and Stephen Cohen hold a structure that ensures they stay in control forever. You can't vote them out. You can't buy them out. They are the permanent monarchs of the data state. We have to ask ourselves, was this inevitable? In a world of infinite data, did we have to invent a Palantir? Perhaps. If they didn't build it, China would have. Or Google might have, secretly.
The appetite for total information awareness is insatiable. Governments will always want to see more. Palantir just stopped pretending that wasn't the goal. They looked the reality of the 21st century in the eye, a reality of terrorism, pandemics, and hybrid warfare, and said, "We will build the Panopticon for the West, so the West can survive." It's a compelling argument. It's also a terrifying one. Because once the Panopticon is built, it doesn't matter if the architect had good intentions. What matters is who sits in the chair next. Palantir is no longer a startup. It is a utility. It is as essential to the US government as the power grid. And that is the final realization. We spent years worrying about the deep state. We worried about unseen bureaucrats making decisions in the dark. We were looking in the wrong place. The deep state isn't a group of people anymore. It's a software license. The files are digitized, the connections are automated, and the predictions are running 24/7 on servers owned by a private corporation. The spy tech didn't just support the government, it absorbed it. The next time you see a headline about a deportation raid, or a drone strike, or a tax audit, don't just ask why, ask how. The answer is likely running on an operating system named after a seeing stone from Lord of the Rings. And just like in the book, the stone looks back. The system is live. The only question left is, are you the user or are you the data? Make sure you're subscribed. The file is still open.